The House of Tosny was an important noble family in 10th and 11th century Normandy, though it did not include any comtes or vicomtes. Its founder was Raoul I of Tosny. Determining the origins of the Tosny family is difficult since the records of that time are rare, and often written a century or more after the events. Among the most accepted historical accounts of this period and region is that of Orderic Vitallis, who wrote in the early 12th century. In his works, Orderic Vitallis relates the story of the origins of the Tosny family as being Scandinavian. In fact, he is quite clear as to who their relations are: the Dukes of Normandy. In clarifying the ancestry of the family, it is stated that Roger de Tosny, then Lord of Tosny and Conches, was de stirpe Malahulcii qui Rollonis ducis patruus. This claim is corroborated by the unknown monk who wrote the Acta Archiepisc Rotomag, who states that the Archbishop Hugo was the son of Hugo de Calvacamp, who was vero fuit prosapia clarus of Malahulc. Considering that no one at the time contested this claim, including the Dukes of Normandy, it is hard to imagine there could be any other origin. It appears as though the earliest challenges to this story come in the 19th century, about a millennium after it first appears. None of the early references were commissioned by the Tosny family, and in fact they do not paint a flattering picture of the founders of the family. Malahulc's son, who is the father of the first Tosny, is called Hugo de Calvacamp. The appellation is somewhat troublesome, because it does not appear to be a real word in any language of the region. The simplest explanation for the word is that it was simply a scribe's error, and the word should have been of the masculine gender instead of the feminine. Calvacampo. Calvacampo is an actual word and means bare field, not a terribly flattering appellation. There have been other suggestions as to the origin of this name, but they all require quite special linguistic gymnastics, and never firmly settle on any concrete answer. I choose to accept the simplest answer, however, as none of the answers actually imply a national origin for Hugonis. The name seems to simply imply that this man was not very wealthy. So how could it be that this man, the descendant of the uncle of the Duke of Normandy, could be so poor? The answer would seem to lie in Hugo's reported ancestor, and the uncle of Rollo/Robert I, Duke of Normandy, Malahulcii, or Malahulc. Again, a unique name written by an author who wrote 2 centuries after his subject lived. Nowhere in the historical record do we find the name Malahulc in any of the cultures even remotely close to Normandy. Not French nor Scandinavian. However, there is a very simple possible explanation. Male is the Breton word for chief, or prince, and Hulk was a very common Norwegian name at the time. If you put the two of them together, you would have Malahulc. This would be similar to someone being called Duke Richard or King Louis. Being written down for the first time about 2 centuries after the subject lived, it would not be surprising for the two words to be pressed together. This would mean that Hulk or Prince Hulk or Malahulc would have had to have some connection to Brittany. Although there is not nearly as much history about the Vikings in Brittany as there is about their exploits in Normandy, it is reasonably well documented. Many documents have been lost over the years. There will be no Breton equivalent to the French Treaty of St. Clair-sur-Ectrem 911 between King Charles of France and Rolf, who Orderic Vitallis tells us was the nephew of Malahulc. However, it is known that such treaties were made in Brittany as well as at other places, and with other Vikings in France. It is also well known that many Vikings assimilated into the societies they sought to rule, and like Rolf would take local titles, and occasionally local names as well. In Rolf's case he became Duke Robert. It would not be too long of a stretch to see a Viking chief named Hulk taking the title Male and becoming Malahulc.